Imagine trying to draw a map of the wind.
Oh, that's a good visual.
Right, like you can draw the trees bending, you can sketch the leaves tearing through the air, you can even draft those little, schematic swoosh lines to indicate directional movement and velocity.
Or the map approach.
Exactly. But you can never actually draw the wind itself. I mean, the wind is entirely formless, so you are strictly limited to rendering its effects.
Its interaction with the physical world.
Yeah, the conditioned world.
Mm.
And the map you end up with is, well, it's entirely composed of conventional approximations. You capture the manifestation, while the ground itself, the sheer unconditioned reality of the kinetic force, it just completely escapes the ink and the paper.
It fundamentally refuses to be pinned down by the medium.
Right. It's unmappable.
Because the medium of the map is constrained by dimension and form, whereas the phenomenon it attempts to capture, operates completely outside those specific dimensional constraints.
Yes, exactly.
Yet, and this is the crucial part, the map remains a functional necessity. If you are navigating a landscape, you have to understand the prevailing conditions.
You need to know which way the wind is blowing.
Right. So you sketch the bending trees and the directional lines, fully aware that they are not the wind, but they successfully orient you within the environment. It is a highly necessary conventional tool pointing toward a reality that remains, by its very nature, ultimately ungraspable by the tool itself.
And this tension, this mapping the unmappable, speaking the unspeakable, this is the exact paradox at the heart of Nagarjuna's Paramārthastava, the hymn to the absolute reality.
It really is.
So welcome to today's deep dive. We are taking you verse by verse through this foundational text today. And because you, our listener, are already intimately familiar with Madhyamaka philosophy, we are skipping the introductory frameworks.
We can dive right into the deep end.
Exactly. You already understand the nuances of dependent origination and the historical context of the Kachistava. You know Nagarjuna's dialectical methods. So today we are setting a highly rigorous bar.
We really are.
We are examining how this specific hymn functions not merely as a devotional poem, but as an advanced epistemological manual for living within a world completely devoid of inherent existence, or, shunyata.
And to decode the architecture of the Paramārthastava, we really need to observe how Nagarjuna deploys specific dialectical unions throughout the text.
Right, the unions.
Yeah, so we were looking at the union of the two truths, or U2T, where the conventional and ultimate are integrated rather than compartmentalized.
Right.
We will also trace the union of opposites, or UOP, in his dismantling of binaries. And then there's the union of the three spheres, U3S, in his deconstruction of the reflexive action of praise.
Which is fascinating.
It is. We also have the union of the ground and its manifestations, UGM, and the union of the three kayas, U3K. The text utilizes these frameworks to articulate a methodology of acting without acting, or U2T in action.
Acting without acting. It sounds almost Taoist when you say it like that. Right. It has that flavor. But here, it is a precise behavioral algorithm for engaging with Tathātā, reality as it is, without generating karmic reification.
It's the ultimate philosophical tightrope walk. So let's jump directly into the performative contradiction that opens the text.
Let's do it.
So, verse 1 reads, Lord, since you are non-originated, residing in no place, transcending any worldly similes, indescribable through the path of words, how can I praise you?
A powerful opening.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Nagarjuna immediately categorizes the Buddha, or the Dharmadhatu, as anutpada, unborn, non-originated. He just right off the bat strips away spatiality, comparative metaphor, and the very utility of language.
And the invocation of anutpada here is deliberate and highly technical. I mean, he is not saying the historical Buddha wasn't born in Lumbini.
Right, he's not denying conventional history.
Exactly. He is establishing the ultimate register. By asserting non-origination, he neutralizes the entire Abhidharma enterprise of categorizing dharmas as having arising, enduring, and ceasing phases.
He's throwing out the whole system. Pretty much. The Dharmadhatu cannot be subjected to prapanka, to conceptual proliferation. Any attempt to use language inherently fragments reality into subject and object.
Which honestly introduces a massive vulnerability in his project.
Oh, absolutely.
Like if we look at this through the lens of early Nyaya logicians or even later thinkers like Dharmakirti who prioritized valid cognition, Pramana
would have a field day with this.
Right, because Nagarjuna is committing a blatant performative contradiction. If ultimate reality entirely transcends language and all dualistic concepts, the very act of writing this hymn is an absurdity.
Yeah, he's using prapanka To denounce Prapanka.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how did his contemporaries not just dismiss verse 1 as an immediate admission of philosophical defeat? I mean, if words cannot describe the absolute, writing a hymn to the absolute seems epistemologically bankrupt.
Well, the Nyaya critique is precisely what Nagarjuna anticipates here.
He knew it was coming.
Of course he did. The question, how can I praise you, is not an admission of defeat. It is a highly calculated dialectical maneuver.
How so?
By articulating the boundary of language using language, he is establishing the precise mechanism of samvrti satya, conventional truth. And remember, the word samvrti carries the connotation of concealing or covering.
Right, it obscures the ultimate.
Yes, conventional truth conceals the ultimate, yet it is the only medium through which the ultimate can be indicated. He is forcing the reader to observe the failure of the linguistic tool in real time.
Oh, that's brilliant.
It is a self-consuming proposition. He speaks the words to exhaust the mind's reliance on words.
It functions like a heavily compressed JPEG image.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Like a highly compressed image file gives you the structural shape of the data. You can see it's a picture of a mountain, but it entirely lacks the high-resolution reality of the original physical mountain.
Right, it's pixelated and blocky.
Exactly. But you don't look at the JPEG and think you are actually standing on the rocks. You use the compressed data to understand the direction of the underlying reality.
You understand what it's pointing to.
Yeah. Nagarjuna is writing a highly compressed linguistic JPEG, acknowledging its pixelation in the very first verse.
That is a great analogy.
Yeah.
And that mechanism carries over perfectly into his methodological solution in verse 2.
Right, where he lays out the plan.
Yeah, he writes, "Although you cannot be praised thus, yet I with great devotion shall praise you in behavioral pattern concerning emptiness truth."
In behavioral pattern concerning emptiness truth. That's a mouthful.
It is. But the key phrase there is the operational definition of U2T in action. He acknowledges the impossibility of the task from an ultimate standpoint, yet proceeds conventionally out of devotion.
I have to pause on the concept of devotion here.
Sure.
Because in a strictly Madhyamaka framework where both the devotee and the object of devotion lack inherent existence, devotion usually runs the risk of becoming this reifying emotion.
It can, yeah.
It implies a substantial self bowing to a substantial other. So how does he rescue devotion from becoming a dualistic trap?
By contextualizing it strictly as an upaya, a skillful means. Devotion in this behavioral pattern is completely stripped of its ontological weight.
So it's just a tool.
Exactly. When he engages in praise, he is not attempting to bridge a gap between a real self and a real Buddha. The emptiness of inherent existence does not negate functional, conventional reality.
Right, because things still function even if they're empty.
Precisely. Because phenomena lack a fixed, independent essence, they are fluid. They can exist conventionally and interact dependently. The devotion functions as an epistemic tool.
Meaning it helps you know reality.
Yes, it aligns the conventional mind with the ultimate reality, even while operating within the realm of illusion. He engages with the illusion, fully lucid to its illusory nature, which preserves its utility while neutralizing its capacity to bind him karmically.
Wow. So if we accept this premise that we must operate using illusory conventional tools without grasping at them, how does he dismantle the specific mechanics of the reality we think we are acting within?
Well, he starts with the big ones.
Right, because he immediately targets the foundational metric of human experience in verse 3, which is time and causality.
The engine of samsara.
Yeah. He states, since you have the nature of non-originated, for you there is no origin, no coming, no going, obeisance to you who unborn nature.
He attacks causality first because, as we said, it's the engine. If you deconstruct time and the causal chain, the characteristics of the objects within that chain naturally dissolve.
They lose their anchor.
Exactly. This is a direct refutation of the Sarvastivada school's assertion that dharmas possess a svabhava, an inherent nature that exists across the three times, past, present, and future. Nagarjuna points out that origination, duration, and cessation cannot inherently exist.
Let's break down the granular mechanics of that refutation for a second.
Okay, let's nerd out.
If we apply the classic Madhyamaka analysis from the Mulamata Makarika, he argues against the four types of origination.
Right, from self, from other, from both, or from neither.
Yeah. So if a seed inherently exists as an independent entity, it cannot transform into a sprout because its inherent nature would be fixed.
It'd just stay a seed forever.
Right. And if the sprout inherently exists as other than the seed, it wouldn't require the seed to arise. It would just pop into existence.
Therefore, cause and effect are not Separate, self-contained events interacting across time. They're mutually co-imputed.
Co-imputed.
Yeah, you cannot conceptualize a cause without an effect to define its causal status.
A cause isn't a cause unless it causes something.
Exactly. Because they arise conceptually together, reliant on one another, they are devoid of absolute independent reality. There's no precise locatable boundary where the seed ends and the sprout begins.
It's just a continuum.
Origination is a conventional designation layered over an empty, unbroken continuum.
And if there is no inherent origination or cessation, the entire 12-link chain of dependent origination, from ignorance all the way to aging and death, is recognized as an empty cycle.
It all unravels.
Right. So the Buddha, as the embodiment of the Dharmadhātu, is therefore unborn. Not in the sense of a primordial void or a static eternity, but completely unbound by the conceptual framework of beginnings and endings.
Which logically leads to his assault on our dualistic processing in verse 4.
Oh, the tetralemma.
Yes. Having dismantled the linear progression of time, he dismantles the horizontal categorization of states using the kataskoti, the tetralemma.
I love this part.
Verse 4 reads, "You are neither existent nor non-existent, neither eternal nor non-eternal, neither permanent nor impermanent. Obeisance to you who are beyond any dualism."
This is where we really need to dig deeply into Madhyamaka logic, because the kataskoti frequently invites accusations of violating the law of non-contradiction or the law of excluded middle.
Western logicians historically struggle with this.
They really do.
Yeah.
When Nagarjuna says not existent, not non-existent, not both, and not neither, leaving no fifth option.
It breaks the binary brain.
Yeah. I mean, our brains are biologically wired for binaries. It's either day or night, this or that. If a proposition isn't true and it isn't false, how do we practically process this without descending into pure dialetheism?
Where we just accept that true contradictions exist.
Right. Are we just meant to short-circuit the conceptual mind here?
Well, the resolution lies in understanding that Nagarjuna is not operating within standard propositional logic where terms have fixed semantic boundaries.
He's playing a different game.
Exactly. He is employing the union of opposites, UOP. Concepts like existence and non-existence are dependently co-arisen. The mind cannot formulate the concept of existence without the contrasting, defining background of non-existence.
Right, they're mutually dependent constructs.
They require each other for their own definitions. By negating all four corners of the tetralemma, Nagarjuna is not making an ontological claim about a mysterious fifth state.
He's not saying there's some secret middle thing.
No, not at all. He is executing an epistemological critique. He is demonstrating that the conceptual categories themselves are inadequate for capturing ultimate reality.
Emptiness is not a state of non-existence.
Right. It is the fact that phenomena do not exist in the binary, reified ways our cognitive architecture attempts to force them into. You abandon the categories entirely. You recognize them as empty heuristics.
Like the day and night thing. We use the binary of day and night conventionally, but from the perspective of the sun and the solar system, day and night have absolutely no inherent reality.
That's a perfect way to look at it.
They're purely relative, positional experiences of the observer on the Earth's surface. Nagarjuna is forcing the observer to take this solar perspective.
The observer is forced to abandon the cognitive habit of grasping at fixed states. And he applies this exact same deconstructive logic to physical characteristics in verse 5.
Moving from abstract states to physical signs.
Yeah, addressing the concept of sinlessness, or nimitta. He writes, "No color is found in you, neither green nor red nor scarlet, neither yellow nor black nor white. Obeisance to you who have the nature of colorlessness."
In Buddhist epistemology, specifically looking at the Sautrantika or even Yogacara theories of perception, nimitta represents the marks or signs that the mind grasps to identify an object.
The labels we attach to things.
Right. So when he uses color here, it is a synecdoche for all phenomenal characteristics.
The cognitive mechanics of perception are what is being scrutinized. When the eye consciousness makes contact with a visual form, the mental consciousness instantly synthesizes that data, applying labels based on past karma, linguistic conditioning, and dependent origination.
So the redness of a flower
Is not an intrinsic independent property residing inside the petals.
right, it's a co-created event.
Exactly. It is a highly contingent event requiring specific light wavelengths, an intact optic nerve, and a conceptual framework capable of abstracting and labeling the experience.
So to say the Buddha has the nature of colorlessness is to say that reality as it is, the unconditioned ground, is entirely free from these imputed signs.
It is the reality prior to the mind's compulsive categorization.
It is the cessation of the mental proliferation that attempts to slice reality into digestible, manageable, and ultimately false units.
Which is terrifying for the conceptual mind.
Oh, absolutely. Because once we strip away time in verse 3, conceptual binaries in verse 4, and perceptual signs in verse 5, Nagarjuna leaves the conceptual mind grasping for a spatial or quantitative foothold.
We want to know where it is and how big it is.
Right. If reality is not born, not existent in a binary sense, and possesses no characteristics, the mind inevitably attempts to measure or locate it.
Which brings us to section 3 of the text's logical progression, verses 6 through 8, where he deconstructs measurement, abiding, and the concept of an absolute ground.
Let's look at verse 6, which directly targets quantitative measurement.
Yeah, he says, "You are neither big nor small, neither long nor spherical. You have reached the stage of immeasurability."
Here is where we must apply the union of the three spheres, U3S, to the mechanism of perception.
Because any act of measurement inherently requires three interdependent components.
The perceiver, the act of measuring or perceiving, and the object being perceived. The subject, the metric, and the object.
Exactly. Because quantitative concepts are entirely relative, big is meaningless without a comparative small. They belong strictly to the dualistic conventional realm.
They depend on each other.
Right. Since the perceiver, the perception, and the perceived arise dependently and lack inherent essence, any measurement they generate is equally empty.
So the Dharmadhatu transcends measurement not by being infinitely massive in a spatial sense.
But because the categorical framework of dimension does not apply to it at all.
The moment you attempt to measure it, you have already fragmented it into the three spheres, meaning you are no longer measuring the ultimate. You are only measuring your own conventional conceptualization.
The act of measurement alters the phenomenon, reducing it to a conventional sign.
That is so profound. And having removed measurement, Nagarjuna removes location in verse 7.
This one is tricky.
It's arguably one of the most provocative verses for a traditional practitioner. He says, "You are neither far away nor near, neither in space nor on the earth, neither in samsara nor in nirvana. Obeisance to you who resides nowhere."
Neither in samsara nor in nirvana.
Let's focus on that part. Because if we look at conservative Sravakayana soteriology, nirvana is explicitly defined as the ultimate cessation of suffering, the unconditioned element, a sankharadhatu, an escape from the cycle of samsara.
It's the whole point of the path for early Buddhism.
Right, so to claim the Buddha does not reside in nirvana seems to contradict the foundational goal of early Buddhism. For you, the Madhyamaka expert listening, this is familiar territory, but how do we unpack the union of ground and its manifestations here?
Well, it is a radical ontological equalization. This is the operational core of UGM.
Equalize in samsara and nirvana.
Yes. Nagarjuna recognizes that if nirvana is posited as a discrete place or state separate from samsara, we've instantly fallen back into the trap of dualism refuted in verse 4.
Oh, I see.
If nirvana inherently exists as not samsara, it is dependently co-arisen with samsara. It relies on samsara for its definition.
Like a gated community.
How so?
A gated community requires the outside world to define its borders. If nirvana is just the opposite of samsara, it is still locked in a binary relationship with it. It needs samsara to be nirvana.
That's a perfect analogy.
Right.
Therefore, true transcendence is the realization of non-abiding nirvana, apratisthita nirvana.
Non-abiding.
Right. The Mahayana conception of enlightenment posits that a Buddha does not completely reject the concepts of samsara and nirvana, but uses them dynamically. Emptiness is the nature of both the suffering and the cessation of suffering.
They share the same empty nature.
Because they share this single nature of emptiness, they are ultimately non-dual. To reside nowhere means the Buddha operates freely across all manifestations, bound neither by an aversion to the suffering of samsara nor an attachment to the peace of nirvana.
And the danger of attachment to nirvana leads directly to the critical warning in verse 8.
Ah, the warning.
He writes, "You do not stay on any dharma, not even emptiness, but are gone into the stage of Dharmadhatu. You have reached the stage of supreme deepness. Obeisance to you who are the nature of unfathomableness."
Not even emptiness.
That parenthetical warning is the most crucial caveat in Madhyamaka philosophy.
It really is. Nagarjuna addresses this extensively in Chapter 13 of the Mula Madhyamaka Karika, where he states that those who hold a view of emptiness, adristi, are incurable.
Incurable, that's a strong word.
Emptiness is the exhaustion of all views. It's a pedagogical solvent.
So if you take the solvent designed to dissolve all reified concepts, and you conceptually reify the solvent itself, itself,
you are in big trouble.
you have essentially ingested poison to cure a disease, only to become fatally addicted to the poison.
It's a profound metaphysical error. The reification of emptiness transforms a dynamic methodology of liberation into a static, nihilistic ontology.
It becomes just another thing to cling to.
Exactly. When Nagarjuna states the Buddha has gone into the stage of Dharmadhātu, he is fiercely guarding against this error. The Dharmadhatu is not a location.
It's not a new ultimate ground that replaces Sansara.
No. It is the supreme unfathomableness of reality when all conceptual grasping, even grasping at the concept of emptiness, has been entirely extinguished.
So if the Buddha does not reside anywhere, cannot be measured, is free from time and signs, and even emptiness cannot be grasped.
What is left?
Right. What is happening in the physical act of Nagarjuna writing this poem? If the ground is totally unnameable, who is acting upon who?
And this is where it all comes together.
Verse 9 brings the dialectic back to the immediate reflexive action of the author. Thus praised, let you be praised, or is he praised? When all dharmas are without essence, who is praised, or by whom can he be praised?
Here, the union of the three spheres is applied directly to the performative act of the hymn itself.
He's turning the lens on his own writing.
Yeah, Nagarjuna interrogates the epistemological validity of his own behavior, the actor, the praiser, the action, the praising, and the object, the praised. They form a codependent matrix.
And the conventional mind assumes these are three distinct, inherently existing entities interacting across space.
Right, but Nagarjuna highlights that because all dharmas lack svabhava, inherent essence, these three spheres only exist in mutual reliance. They're like mirages or echoes.
But this invites the ultimate pragmatist pushback.
Sure, the why bother argument.
Exactly. If the praiser, the praising, and the praised are entirely empty, if they are merely an interdependent matrix of illusions, why act at all?
Why not just sit in silence?
Right. A critic could argue that if Nagarjuna truly realized the emptiness of the three spheres, he would put the pen down. Engaging in the act of praise seems to validate the illusion. If a mirage of water cannot quench conventional thirst, why perform a mirage of praise?
This is where we separate Madhyamaka from pure nihilism.
Okay, how?
A mirage of water will not quench a thirst, but a conventional cup of water, despite being ultimately empty of inherent existence, is relatively efficient at quenching conventional thirst.
Ah, so it still works.
Yes. The action of praise is an upaya, a highly efficient, skillful means. If Nagarjuna ceased all action due to the emptiness of the spheres, he would be clinging to the extreme of non-existence.
He'd be stuck in nihilism.
He would be reifying emptiness as an absolute truth that negates conventional functionality.
He would be violating the union of the two truths.
Exactly. The resolution is found in verse 10, transcending without rejecting. He says, "Who can praise you devoid origination and decay, neither perception nor perceived?"
Transcending without rejecting.
The Madhyamaka path does not require the obliteration of the conceptual mind or the cessation of conventional activity. We transcend the dualistic habit of reifying origination and decay, perceiver and perceived, without destroying the mechanism of perception itself.
So we still use the tools.
We utilize the conventional linguistic and behavioral tools, like writing a hymn of praise, recognizing them as empty, thereby stripping them of their karmic weight.
The action leaves no karmic footprint because there is no reified actor clinging to a reified result.
Precisely.
You execute the action perfectly within the conventional realm while remaining unbound in the ultimate realm.
It is the pinnacle of U2T in action. And this leads flawlessly into the conclusion of the text in verse 11, where this methodology is directed outward through the Mahayana ideal of bodhicitta.
The dedication of merit.
Yes. He writes, "Thus praising the Sugata, who is neither gone nor come and is devoid of any going, through the merits thus acquired may this world practice the path of Sugata."
It's beautiful. After systematically deconstructing every facet of epistemology, ontology, and phenomenology, he concludes by dedicating the merit of the action for the benefit of all sentient beings.
He dedicates merit while simultaneously holding the view that the merit, the beings receiving it, and he himself are entirely empty.
This is the synthesis of compassion and wisdom.
On two wings of the bird.
Right. Compassion addresses the relative suffering of beings within conventional truth. Wisdom understands the ultimate emptiness of those beings.
And you need both.
Why is it so dangerous to just have one?
Because if you possess compassion without wisdom, you succumb to the exhaustion of samsara, believing the suffering to be inherently real and absolute. It leads to burnout and despair.
And what about wisdom without compassion?
If you possess wisdom without compassion, you risk falling into the Sravakayana extreme of isolated cessation, viewing the world as irrelevant. You just check out.
But bodhicitta requires both.
Dedicating the merit of an empty act for the salvation of empty beings is the ultimate expression of a Buddha who is neither gone nor come.
So let's synthesize the architecture of the Paramārthastava.
It's quite a structure.
It really is. Nagarjuna has provided far more than a devotional text here. He has constructed a rigorous behavioral algorithm for operating within a reality devoid of inherent existence.
A blueprint for living.
The middle way is frequently and erroneously characterized as a passive compromise, like it's just splitting the difference.
Right, sitting on the fence.
But what Nagarjuna demonstrates here is that the middle way requires intense, dynamic cognitive engagement. You must constantly wield conventional tools, language, causality, measurement, action.
While simultaneously actively deconstructing their absolute validity in real time.
It demands an unrelenting epistemological vigilance.
Yeah.
You are operating the machinery of samsara without believing in the ghosts within the machine.
That's a great way to put it. When you realize the walls of the conceptual frameworks are entirely permeable, you do not simply cease functioning. You utilize that permeability to dismantle the suffering of others.
You act without acting.
You act without acting.
To bring this back to our initial paradigm, you cannot map the wind. But the map of the bending trees is not merely a failed approximation. It is a vital tool for navigation, provided you do not confuse the ink for the atmosphere.
Don't mistake the finger for the moon.
Exactly. For you, the practitioner and scholar analyzing this text, the challenge is not merely intellectual comprehension of the Kataskoti or the three spheres. The challenge is the behavioral integration.
The translation of philosophy into U to T in action.
I want to leave you with a final analytical lens to apply to your own understanding of these verses. We explored how the actor, the action, and the result are interdependent and ultimately empty.
An echo in a canyon, co-arising and co-ceasing.
Right. And the conventional mind reacts to this with existential vertigo. It assumes that if an action is empty, it is devoid of meaning.
It feels nihilistic.
But consider the inverse. If every conventional action you take, every word you speak, every task you complete is an echo within an empty room, does that render the action meaningless? Or does the absolute emptiness of the room provide the precise, unconditioned freedom necessary to dictate exactly what kind of echo you choose to manifest?
The lack of inherent existence is the very precondition for change, compassion, and liberation. Because the room is empty, the echo can resonate.
The ultimate reality isn't a void that silences you. It's the acoustics that allow your skillful means to be heard.
Beautifully said.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back next time to unpack another layer of the universe. Until then, mind your echoes.